Mark wiped the floor of the maintenance corridor for the third time that morning, his mop squeaking across the smooth metal surface. The station hummed with life above him, engineers, scientists, and security personnel, all busy with their routines. To most of them, Mark was just a cleaner, a background figure who quietly went about his work. But beneath his blue jumpsuit and the streaks of cleaning solution on his sleeves, carried knowledge that often went unnoticed. He knew the pipes, the vents, the wires. He understood the heartbeat of this massive space station better than anyone who only read manuals or ran simulations. He glanced at the small wristwatch he had fixed himself, second hand ticking steadily. His daughter Lily would be up soon. She lived with him here on the station, her tiny room filled with toys, a small desk, and posters of faraway planets she loved to draw. Mark smiled at the thought of her and pushed a stubborn stain on the floor with extra effort. Keeping the station clean was not just a job. It was a way to make his life feel a little more ordered in the chaos of orbital life. Today, though the station seemed unusually tense, the usual hum of machinery had a sharper edge, a slight vibration that made the lights flicker. Mark noticed it immediately as he mopped near the main reactor maintenance wing. A low-frequency alarm sounded, faint but persistent. He frowned. Maintenance logs didn't report any issues, yet his gut told him otherwise. He stepped into the reactor observation room, through a side door he had memorized long ago. Scientists were clustered around screens, arguing over graphs and simulations. One of them, Dr. Harker, waved him away. "Not now, Mark. We're in the middle of recalibrating the flux output." Mark nodded, though inwardly he felt frustration bubble up. He wasn't asking to be involved. He was observing quietly. His eyes scanned the reactor's pipes and cooling systems. A tiny line of condensation had formed around a joint in one of the pipes, a hairline crack. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. He crouched and traced it with his gloved hand. "This isn't right," he muttered. He straightened and looked at the screens. Energy readings fluctuated, pulsing unevenly. The scientists were too absorbed in their data sets to notice the subtle warning signs. Mark had learned to trust his instincts over complex algorithms. "Hey, Mark, stop wasting time," one of the engineers called, not looking up from a terminal. "You're not trained for this." Mark took a deep breath. He could have left it alone and continued cleaning. Most cleaners did. But he knew the danger. He had seen what could happen when small anomalies went unchecked. He returned to his mop, but his mind was not on cleaning. He mentally mapped the routes to the reactor's emergency panels, the maintenance tunnels, the manual override systems. He needed to prepare quietly, in case the situation worsened. Hours passed, and the anomaly grew. Small warnings turned into system alerts. A red light blinked faintly on a far control panel. Scientists still argued over what the reading meant. Security officers strolled by, not taking the warning seriously. Mark, carrying a bucket of water and cleaning supplies, paused in the corridor, thinking about the pressure buildup in the reactor's core. He had seen similar stress patterns before, during simulations he had once been allowed to observe. "You're being paranoid?" Dr. Harker said, when Mark tried to point out the condensation. "The sensors don't report any significant risk." Mark smiled faintly, not out of humor, but from knowing what he had to do. Paranoia was safe. Complacency was dangerous. As evening approached on the station, the low-frequency hum turned into a subtle vibration that could be felt in the floor under his feet. The red alert lights began flashing on the main corridor monitors. A mechanical voice announced, "Reactor containment stress detected. Immediate action required." Chaos erupted. Scientists scrambled to their stations, and security personnel blocked off corridors without understanding the full threat. Mark moved with purpose. He left his cleaning tools behind and accessed the maintenance tunnels, bypassing the crowded observation areas. Every step was precise. Every movement had a goal. He reached the lower maintenance deck where the primary coolant valves were housed. The pipes glowed faintly from the heat inside, and he could hear the low hiss of pressurized gas. A valve had begun leaking. It was small, almost nothing, but enough to cause a chain reaction if ignored. He grabbed a wrench from his utility belt and began tightening the valve while assessing the surrounding infrastructure. Mark's mind raced, thinking several steps ahead. The reactor could reach critical meltdown in minutes if the coolant flow wasn't stabilized. He needed to reroute the pressure, redirect the excess energy, and ensure the venting system was online. He worked quickly, using his practical knowledge of machinery that no one else on the station seemed to understand fully. A voice crackled over the station intercom. "What are you doing down there, Mark?" "That area is restricted." He didn't reply. Words wouldn't help. Only action could. Minutes passed like seconds. Sweat ran down his forehead, and the vibration underfoot grew stronger. A faint smell of burning metal filled the air. Mark adjusted a panel, reconnected a coolant line with a spare pipe he found, and manually checked the pressure gauges. Every reading needed to be exact. One miscalculation, and the station could be lost. Back in the main reactor observation room, Dr. Harker stared at the monitors in disbelief. "What is he doing?" she muttered. The system logs were showing manual overrides in sections that were supposed to be inaccessible. Every expert in the room felt a sinking realization they had underestimated him. Mark crawled through another tunnel, reaching a junction where several pipes converged. He noticed a secondary leak forming at a support junction. The metal had weakened, likely due to constant pressure and minor corrosion over the years. He improvised, using clamps from his maintenance kit to stabilize the junction. It was risky, but necessary. Time was running out. The reactor core's temperature continued to climb. Alarms blared throughout the station. Scientists yelled at each other, but no one acted fast enough. Mark moved with precision, fueled by experience, instinct, and a determination to keep his daughter safe. Finally, he reached the main venting system. The emergency release valves had not been engaged. He manually activated them, redirecting excess heat and pressure into secondary containment chambers. The reactor's core temperature began to stabilize. Just as the first real danger signs appeared in the main observation room monitors, everyone watched in stunned silence. Red lights blinked, sirens wailed, and then slowly, the readings began to normalize. Dr. Harker blinked, unable to believe what she was seeing. Security officers stepped aside. Watching the cleaner who had silently become the station's savior, Mark wiped his brow and allowed himself a small smile. He had done what others thought impossible. He had prevented a disaster that no amount of training or technology alone could have stopped. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Minutes later, he would return to Lily, to her warm smile and the quiet peace of her room. For now, he moved back through the tunnels, carrying nothing but his practical knowledge and calm determination. The station had survived because a human underestimated and overlooked, trusted his instincts, and acted without hesitation as he emerged from the maintenance tunnels. Scientists surrounded him, full of questions, admiration, and disbelief. Mark didn't mind the sudden attention. He had no desire for accolades. He only wanted to ensure the safety of the people he cared about and continue living his quiet life with his daughter, doing the work that often went unnoticed but mattered most. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this was just the beginning. The station, the universe, and the challenges it held would always underestimate him. But Mark also knew that humans, with their courage, quick thinking, and resilience, could always rise to the occasion. Even in the most impossible moments, he straightened his jumpsuit, wiped his hands on a rag, and began walking toward the living quarters. The alarms had quieted, the lights returned to normal, and life on the station seemed to resume as if nothing had happened. But Mark knew the truth. A disaster had been averted, and it had taken the mind and courage of a single dad cleaner to do it. When he finally opened the door to Lily's room, he found her reading a small book she loved. She looked up and smiled. "Did you finish work, Dad?" Mark nodded, smiling back. "Yeah, Lily, just finished. Let's have some dinner." As he watched her return to her book, he felt a quiet pride. Today had proven something vital. No one should ever underestimate a human's ability to adapt, think, and act, no matter how ordinary they seemed. And in the shadows of the station, the reactor rested quietly, stable, alive, and safe fall because of one man who refused to be ignored. Mark walked down the quiet corridors of the station, leaving behind the brief commotion of alarms and flashing lights. Most of the personnel were returning to their stations, whispering about what had just happened. Some stared at him with newfound respect, while others tried to mask their disbelief. Mark ignored them all. He had only one thought: keeping the station safe until the reactor was fully stable, and ensuring his daughter Lily could sleep peacefully tonight. The hum of the reactor was steady for now, but he knew the danger wasn't gone. One wrong move, one overlooked valve, and the entire station could erupt. He headed back toward the maintenance tunnels, this time prepared for direct action. His jumpsuit was streaked with sweat and grime. His hands blackened from previous fixes, but his resolve was sharper than ever. He carried only a small toolkit, a wrench, and a few spare clamps he had scavenged from previous repairs. He didn't need fancy equipment. He needed precision, speed, and a clear mind. As he reached the junction near the main reactor, a red warning light flashed urgently. The reactor's core temperature was rising again, faster than before. Mark froze for a moment, then sprinted down the narrow passage toward the primary coolant system. Sparks flew from a panel that had overheated, and the smell of ozone filled the air. This was no longer a drill, this was real. Seconds counted. He reached the coolant chamber and examined the valves. The pressure gauges quivered violently. A pipe was beginning to swell dangerously, a faint crack forming along its seam. Mark grabbed the wrench and tightened the connections as best he could, but he knew it was not enough. He had to reroute the coolant flow, creating a temporary bypass that would take the strain off the main system. Working quickly, he disconnected a secondary line and attached it to a nearby vent, improvising a loop that would safely channel the excess coolant. The metal hissed under the heat, and sweat poured down his face. The station seemed to shake with each pulse of energy from the reactor, and he knew that any mistake could trigger a catastrophic meltdown. Almost there, he muttered to himself, checking the flow meters. The pressure was slightly reduced, but the core temperature was still climbing. Mark realized he needed to engage the emergency venting system manually. The automated systems had failed to respond. If he didn't act, the containment chamber would breach in seconds. He crawled through a narrow service duct to reach the venting control panel. Sparks leaped from broken wires, and a small fire had started at one corner. Mark ignored it, focusing on the panel. He had memorized its layout from years of observation. With steady hands, he engaged the manual override, redirecting the excess energy to the auxiliary containment units. The alarms blared even louder, but the pressure gauges began to stabilize. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the tunnel. A section of piping above him had come loose, threatening to block his path. Mark acted fast, using his wrench to secure it, twisting with all his strength. The metal groaned under the strain, but held. Every movement was calculated, every second precious. Back in the observation room, Dr. Harker and the other scientists watched the monitors with wide eyes. The readings showed the manual override in effect, stabilizing the reactor. How is he doing that? One engineer asked in disbelief. He shouldn't even know how. Mark ignored the praise. He had no time for it. One last task remained, stabilizing the main valve that had first triggered the chain reaction. He sprinted to the control hub, the floor vibrating beneath him as the reactor pulsed dangerously. He tightened the bolts, checked the coolant flow, and engaged the final safety lock. The hissing sounds began to diminish, and the alarms changed from urgent red to steady orange, signaling a temporary safe status. For the first time in what felt like hours, Mark allowed himself a deep breath. The reactor was stable, for now. He wiped his brow with the back of his glove, his heart still racing. He could feel the weight of what had just happened. The station could have been destroyed, countless lives lost. But it had been avoided by a man everyone thought incapable of such heroism. Security personnel approached cautiously, unsure whether to interfere or congratulate him. One of them, a burly officer named Carson, finally broke the silence. Mark, that was incredible. You saved the station? Mark shook his head. Just doing what needed to be done. That's all. He didn't want to hear praise. He had learned long ago that action mattered more than recognition. Dr. Harker walked up, her eyes wide. You bypassed the automatic systems and stabilized the reactor manually. How? How did you know? Mark gave a small shrug. I've been watching, learning. Machines give signs if you know how to read them. You don't need fancy simulations when you pay attention. She stared at him, slowly realizing the truth. All the protocols, all the calculations, all the automated warnings, they couldn't replace human intuition and courage. One human, underestimated and overlooked, prevented a disaster that could have destroyed everything. Mark finally allowed himself to smile, not for recognition but for relief. He thought of Lily, waiting for him. He headed to the living quarters, the adrenaline gradually fading, replaced by exhaustion. Every step reminded him how fragile life was, how quickly disaster could strike, and how much human determination could matter. When he opened Lily's door, she looked up from her drawing. "Did you finish work, Dad?" she asked innocently. "Yes, Lily, I'm here," Mark replied, sitting beside her. She leaned against him, and he felt the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in hours. They shared a quiet moment, a small bubble of peace amid the chaos of the station. Outside, station had returned to its routine. Scientists reviewed data, trying to understand the near catastrophe. Engineers inspected the pipes, amazed that a single human had recognized the warning signs and acted faster than any automated system could. Security personnel whispered about the cleaner who had saved them all. Mark knew their words didn't matter. He had never wanted to be a hero. He simply did what needed to be done because no one else was paying attention, and because lives depended on it. Hours later, the station was calm. The reactor was stable, and the minor repairs Mark had made were reinforced by the engineering team. Yet the memory of the crisis lingered, a reminder of how easily chaos could strike and how human courage could avert it. Mark sat in his small quarters, Lily asleep in her bed. He allowed himself a moment of reflection. He was just a cleaner, a single dad, someone easily overlooked in a world of brilliant scientists and officers. And yet, in the most critical moment, it was his eyes, his hands, and his mind that had made the difference. He realized something essential. Humans were capable of extraordinary things. Even when underestimated, knowledge, observation, and courage mattered more than status or titles. The ability to act decisively, to improvise, and to trust one's instincts was the true power of humanity. The next morning, Dr. Harker visited him in the maintenance wing. Holding a small cup of synthesized coffee, she didn't know how to express her gratitude. "Mark, I don't even know what to say. You saved everyone. The station. It owes you its life." Mark accepted the cup with a faint smile. "Just keep an eye on the systems. Learn to read them. That's all I ask." She nodded, understanding that this was more than recognition, it was a lesson. Human intuition, courage, and attention to detail were priceless. No amount of technology could replace them. Weeks later, the incident was recorded in the station's logs as an example of quick thinking and improvisation. Mark returned to his daily routines, quietly cleaning floors, fixing leaks, and taking care of Lily. No grand ceremony, no trophies. Only the satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference when it mattered most. And every time he walked through the reactor wing, he glanced at the panels and valves with a quiet confidence. He knew their secrets, their weaknesses, and how to protect them. The station was safe, and he had proven something vital. One human, underestimated and overlooked, could make all the difference in the universe. Mark kissed Lily on the forehead that evening and whispered, "Humans can do anything, Lily. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." She smiled in her sleep, and for the first time, he truly believed that even in the vastness of space, human courage and ingenuity could shine brighter than any star, and somewhere deep within the station's systems, the reactor hummed steadily, a silent testament to one man's quiet heroism.